Welcome to another episode of the Inner Typewriter, the show with typewriters, coffee, and conversations about how to make our writing better. I'm your host, Scott Calhoun, and I know what you're all thinking. Thank God he got a haircut. Yeah. I am too. With me today is Bonnie Monte.
Yeah.
She's the author of The Sleeping Lady, which is a cozy mystery. And when did you write this book? When did you complete it?
I wrote it for years and years and years. I'm embarrassed to say how many years. But it got published in last June. So it's been out for about a half a year.
June 2018.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. So the topic for today's show is cozy mysteries. And The Sleeping Lady is a cozy mystery, right?
Yes, it is.
And what's the definition of this genre, cozy mystery? How is it different from just regular mystery?
Well, a strictly cozy mystery it's set in a small town usually, or a small setting within a town, say a bookshop or a library. It has an amateur sleuth, typically. So that's a challenge because the amateur sleuth is not at the autopsy, they don't have access to forensics, they're just using their smarts.
I see.
And typically a cozy has, I was at a conference, at a panel recently where a writer, Penny Warner, was saying, a cozy has no sex, no swearing, and no reason to read it. And I disagree heartily. I think
that was a critique, right?
Yes, she doesn't write cozies. But typically no sex, no swearing, and the big thing I think is no violence on screen, if you will. Mm-hmm. There is a murder, of course, but there's not a lot of blood and guts. It's kind of sanitized. It's like that TV show Midsummer Murders, where it's kind of there's a comical edge to it. Mm-hmm. It's very small town, very folksy.
It's almost like the Hallmark card of
murder. Yes.
Of murder. Oh, that's
yes.
better. That's better.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So what are the main influences on your mystery writing? How did you decide, I've got to write one of those?
Well, I grew up reading mysteries. Nancy Drew, which I guess would qualify as a cozy. Mm-hmm. She was an amateur sleuth. And then Agatha Christie, devoured every Agatha Christie. And my dad was a really big mystery fan. And I think what I liked most is the puzzle of trying to figure it out and solve it. I didn't like any gory details or I wasn't interested so much in the crime as the puzzle, the clues that are planted along the way, and trying to, that sort of dance with the reader and the writer working together.
Wonderful. So yeah. Agatha Christie, Nancy Drew, any more recent idols of yours? Yeah,
I like Elizabeth George a lot, her Inspector Lynley series. Mm-hmm. And she's Inspector Lynley, and then Martha Grimes writes the Richard Jury mysteries. It's interesting, both of those are American writers, but they write English mysteries.
Oh, that is interesting.
I think I'm a kind of wannabe English person, or at least the ideal of the small English village, which maybe doesn't exist. I don't know.
Right, well, and then, it's a work of fiction, it's cozy, the setting is almost better in a small town in Britain because it's very peculiar and
quirky. People are quirky, and it's old-fashioned. Mm-hmm. And
but yours takes place here in Marin County in California.
Yes. It does, but it takes place mostly in Fairfax and San Anselmo. I lived in San Anselmo for quite a few years, and my sleuth lives in Fairfax. And so that is a small town. I mean, it's very cosmopolitan, and being right in the Bay Area, but the kind of the small town setting. My sleuth owns a shop on San Anselmo Avenue, and my sleuth, Ray Sullivan, is from Brooklyn originally, as am I. And she is just so enamored of Marin. To her, it's this green paradise. And so
Is that also true for you?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so I wanted to get that across about what a wonderful place this is. But I also skewer some of the Marin tropes a bit, the entitlement, but that's not a big part of it. It's mostly about how lovely it is.
Right, right. Well, Fairfax is very cozy.
Yes,
I'll grant
it is
you that.
cozy.
I agree. So how do you set out to write a mystery? And, maybe this applies to other mysteries that aren't just cozy, but do you map out the whole puzzle ahead of time and then reverse engineer to write chapter 1? Or do you sort of explore the mystery from the inciting incident on with your characters and figure it out as you go? This has been a big question of mine.
Well, I think some writers do it one way and some do another. I knew ahead of time every detail of the crime, who did it, and why. But I didn't really have a middle to the book. I knew the beginning and I knew the end. And how does a sleuth get there? And as I said, as an amateur sleuth, she can't just show up and start questioning people.
Well, that was very convenient that character just happened to give that information.
So I had to contrive some things of how she finds things out. And people tell her things, and that's a challenge of writing a cozy mystery, as opposed to a police procedural, say, where you're writing from the point of view of the police. And that's another distinction of cozies, is that you have a limited cast of characters. And as the reader, you kind of know that one of them is going to be guilty, and you're just trying to figure out which one. Whereas in many mysteries, it's more open-ended. The police are tracking down a killer, and the killer might not show up till the end.
Right.
And you're following how they identify this person, which is more realistic.
Right, a little more realism. A little more
yeah, and you may not have met the character till he or she is caught. But in a cozy, you know it's one of these people.
So when you say limited cast of characters, one of them's guilty, how many is that, like 5?
Yeah,
10?
I had about 5 or 6 people that could have been considered suspects.
And do you make each one, motive, means?
Well, I
tried
tried opportunity.
Opportunity, yeah.
I didn't think it through that thoroughly, but I tried to cast suspicion on a few of them. They did, mostly motive-wise. Opportunity, I guess they all had the opportunity, so. But it's interesting that I've heard other mystery writers say that they thought they knew who did it, and as the story evolved, as they were writing it, they decided someone else did it. And I thought, I could never write that way. I mean, maybe in the future a book will happen that way, but that's not how I wrote this book.
Yeah.
It was very clear to me who did it and why.
Good. Well, I have written a story where a reader convinced me to change the ending drastically and have something happen to someone when it would have been happening to someone else. And it was more powerful. But it wasn't a murder. So that doesn't count. So it's good to be open, but it's also good to have a tight story that everything is kind of tied up at the end. Does it get resolved?
It does, and that's another hallmark of cozy mysteries. Is that the reader has to feel satisfied, and they should. It should make sense. They maybe look back and say, "Oh, that's why she did that," or "That's why he did that." But you don't want them to figure it out too soon, because then why keep reading? But you don't want them to figure it out too late after it's revealed. You don't want them to have to puzzle over it. It should all make sense. But it is satisfying, and justice is done.
Justice is served.
Yes.
This question just popped in my head. Does your main character, you said her name was Ray?
Yes.
Does she change over the course? Does she go through a big arc, or is a cozy mystery kind of episodic, like, start and end in the same place?
She does. There's a big upheaval in her life by the end, but that's not necessarily true of all cozy mysteries, especially if you're writing a series. I mean, how many upheavals can a person go through? Yeah. But the character should grow along the way.
All right. Well, how many drafts did you write for this book?
Many. I started out with 2 points of view. I had, again, the problem of her being an amateur. I also had 2 detectives who are still in the story, but I had chapters that were from their point of view as well. And that was a way of giving information to the reader. And then I did have someone read the book, an editor, and she said, you know, I think you need to have Ray drive the action. Don't have the 2 points of view. So that entailed a lot of rewriting. And I cut
Up to that point, how many
Oh, I don't know. Countless drafts. Years and years, because I was working full time. And it was kind of, I put it aside, and then people would be discouraging. Not people who read it, but people would say, oh, it's impossible to get published. You can't find an agent. And so I put it was more of a hobby. And then, I don't know, something just clicked where I felt like, okay, it's time. I need to get this book out there.
That's kind of like building a house, and then you're pretty much doing the final paint job, and then some architect says, you should put the staircase over there.
Yeah, start all over.
And put the windows over, and it's like, oh, great, I had to.
But at that point, I really loved my characters, and I felt like I knew them, so it wasn't that hard to kind of recast it. Oh, and the interesting thing that happened is when I had Ray driving the action, I realized I needed to put it in the first person. First, it was in the third person, just a narrator, an anonymous narrator, and 2 points of view. And then it became a lot stronger when Ray was telling the story. I felt like she really came into her own, and the voice got better.
Does it feel a little grittier in the first person than a sort of cozy, omniscient narrator?
No, it was still, because she's just this innocent, person, shopkeeper. So it wasn't gritty, but I felt like it became more authentic.
Good. So what's it like to write a story where you can actually walk around in your story? Because a lot of us can't do that, and I'm kind of envious that
Yes, I felt like I knew the setting really well, I knew the people really well, and as far as Ray's shop that she owns with Thalia, her business partner, I did work in retail for a while on the writing and editing side. So I kind of knew something about stores and home and garden. I used to work at Smith & Hawken when they were around. So I brought a lot of my own experience to the book. But Fairfax has always seemed like the ideal town to me. It's just, there's something about it. And so I probably idealized it a bit in the book, but yeah.
I just think that's so cool. And it's like, oh, I have to describe the theater. Let's just go walk out to the theater and like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
the sunlight glints off it just like that.
Yeah.
There's a little pockmark right there. I mean, it's so accessible. Do you think the art form of the cozy mystery is well defined and pretty much set, or is it growing? Is it changing? Is it going to splinter off into 2 ways?
Well, I think it's becoming more modernized. There is that whole subgenre of it that is still very sanitized, no swearing, no sex. There are those books about cats solving mysteries and quilters and beekeepers, which is all great. But mine is a little more updated. She's kind of a contemporary woman. And I've discovered a writer, Sandra Balzo, and she writes about a woman who owns a coffee house. And she writes a series. And I feel like, I really have a lot in common with that. This person is a little edgier, and she's a little more realistic. And I didn't read those until after I wrote my book, but so I think cozies, there are more modern day cozies now.
And so the readers are open to the modern updates?
Well, I don't know. I think readers gravitate toward, some people love those cat-solving mysteries that are very pure cozy. And there's no sex unless people are married, of course. There's no single women dating and having sex. But I don't know. I don't know if people like my book because it's a cozy or just because they like the characters.
It's a good mystery.
Yeah, or because it's a mystery, murder mystery.
Any cat mysteries?
No.
Inspector Fluffy coming to town?
I have no plans for cat mystery.
Sorry, fans.
My sleuth does have a dog, and the dog's in the book, but
But he
The
doesn't
dog
get
said,
any
no,
clues.
he's not solving the crime.
So let's say someone watching is thinking of writing their first cozy mystery. What would be your advice to them?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's a good mystery. I wouldn't think of it so much as a cozy. And I think what makes a good mystery is the characters. They have to be fleshed out and real, even with a great puzzle and some amazing reversal at the end. People are not going to stick with it if they don't like the characters. So you have to really get to know your characters, and writers talk about, take your character out for a drink and sit and talk with them, metaphorically. I didn't do that, but I do feel like I really got to know my characters. And then what else? Just polish, and have other people read it. It's really important, because even though you know what you're trying to say, it doesn't always come across on the page.
Bringing full circle, you said you weren't sure what would happen in the middle.
Yes.
What was sort of the clincher that was like, oh, that's what's going to happen? Is there any nugget of wisdom in that discovery?
I realized that Ray didn't have to understand everything, all the clues I was giving to the reader. Things could be happening, and the reader would say, oh, he was there. And she didn't have to be processing all this herself. And then a lot of people say, well, the formula is that there should be a second murder, a second body. And I didn't have that, but I did have an attack on someone, on one of the characters. And so there was an attempted second murder. So that helped. That provided a couple of chapters.
So you have to get some tension in the middle.
Yes,
right?
yes, the middle. People talk about, I just wrote a blog post about this. The middle is so hard for so many writers, not just of mysteries, but of any fiction, of how do you keep the action going.
Well, that'll have to be a future episode, I think. What do you do in the middle? What do you do in Act 2?
Yes, yes, I knew Act 1, I knew Act 3. I had no Act 2 when I started.
Well, that's great. Wrapping things up a little bit, what are you thinking for your next adventure? I'm
working on another one with Ray Sullivan again as the sleuth.
So it's a series.
I'm hoping it's a series. And again, it's set locally. She still lives in Fairfax. And it's about a controversial, some developer, and people are opposed to this development, and a typical Fairfax.
That sounds very
And someone said to me, does
real.
the developer get killed? And I said, yes. And they said, great. So that's my next book.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
We had this lovely Sears Medalist Power 12, which is a Selectric, and I'm just going to turn it on. It's got this funny little switch here to turn it on. Let's see if I remember how to, there we go. And I don't know if you can hear that. It's got this neat little hum, and actually the type action on it is pretty cool. I'll just do a couple of little. And the cool thing is yes, you can just push the carriage to return it, but it's got this return button. So, hey, the return button exists. You don't have to just manually push the carriage back every time. And hey guys, that's where the return button comes from. And yes, the space bar is a little loose, but hey, it still works. And it's actually got this little button right here, which doesn't exist, called the half space. So, you know, if you wanted to have your words closer together,
for some reason,
you could do that. But I thought that was cool, and I'm totally looking forward to future episodes with you.
Thank you.
And learning more about your experience. And I'm just gonna turn that back off. And there is one other thing I wanted to talk about, which was not planned.
Oh.
It's a bonus feature. And we found out this morning that you were a contestant on Jeopardy.
I was.
Okay,
Not my finest moment.
Well.
But I'll tell you why.
You're already a celebrity. because of
Of
that.
sorts.
So tell us about that.
Well, the hardest part was actually passing the test to get on the show. Those questions were very hard, and I did pass. And then for the show, a friend's husband had been on Jeopardy, and he told me, "Oh, the hardest part is working the buzzer, because you can't ring in too soon. You have to wait till a light comes on, and then of course you don't want to be too late. Everybody's racing to buzz,
Right.
and some people get the timing perfectly, and some, like me, do not.
Oh.
And every time and the person next to me, she was great with the buzzer. I still
Yeah.
remember her name, Sandy. And she just rang in every time. And then there were some questions where none of us knew the answer.
Right.
So we were just all there
You got
in
the
total
timing right.
silence.
Uh-oh.
And so I knew a lot of answers that I didn't answer, but the humiliation was the final Jeopardy question.
Oh no, what happened?
And I studied everything about Canada because Alex is Canadian, and I knew they asked Canada questions. And the answer was Halifax, I think. Yeah. But I
Nova
didn't
Scotia.
understand the question. It was very convoluted, and I guess I was nervous. And it was something about, I don't even remember. This was 20 years ago. But I right at the end, I thought, oh, I get what they're asking. They're asking for the name of the city. And I started to write, and the pen shuts off.
Oh,
the
no.
music stops.
Oh, no.
And I had just nothing.
Palette.
I didn't even have that. I started the H. So, but I got a consolation prize, and it was wonderful.
So
it was a wonderful experience.
This isn't your first TV show by any means.
No.
Oh, that's such a great story. I don't know if we'll be able to get a clip of that. That's so great.
It was fun.
Thank you so much for
Thank
being on
you.
the show.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you all
Thank
for
you.
watching. And remember, as always, to follow, share, and subscribe.